Deaths in Glenmorach Manor, a fiction novel. Written by Shirley, read by Sir Lawrence Olivier. This audiobook was narrated using synthetic voice technology provided by 11 Labs. Chapter 24. A musty odor immediately hit me as I swung the basement trapdoor open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into the darkness below the basement. I lit the candle and cautiously made my way down, the tiny flame wavering in the chilly, damp air. The basement's stone walls seemed to be closing in on me, creating a grimly claustrophobic atmosphere. I almost fell down the stairs twice before I made it to the bottom because they were slippery. As my feet touched the cold stone floor, I heard a faint groan, followed by a weak, strained voice. "Help! Please, someone, help me." The voice was raspy, desperate. I froze for a moment, instinctively squinting into the murky darkness. I could just make out a shadowed figure seated on the floor. The light from my candle flickered briefly before revealing him. A young man, his back hunched, his face pale in the dim glow. "Anthony?" I called out, the name escaping my lips before I even realized I'd spoken it. The figure jerked, and his eyes, bloodshot and tired, snapped to mine. "Mr. Owen, is that really you?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I rushed forward, my heart pounding in my chest. There, sitting in front of me, was none other than Anthony Wallace, the young man who had been missing for 2 days. He was bound to a rusted iron bed frame with a thick rope around his wrist, his left hand cruelly secured in place. "Blimey, Anthony," I breathed, kneeling beside him. My hands trembled as I carefully examined the rope. "What happened? How did you end up here?" He blinked rapidly, looking disoriented, as if struggling to focus. I don't know what I remember. I remember being followed, and then everything went black." He winced as I touched his wrist. "People are freaking out, Anthony. We have been looking for you for the past 2 days since you went missing," I said, my breath hasty as I tried to untie the ropes binding Anthony's hands and feet. "I've been here for 2 days. I don't know how long it's been anymore. I couldn't move. I couldn't even call for help." His voice faltered, the weight of his situation sinking in. I quickly untied the knot around his wrist, feeling a pang of guilt as I saw the raw, irritated skin where the rope had bitten into him. "You're safe now. I'll get you out of here." I glanced around the basement, my eyes narrowing as I surveyed the surroundings. The air felt musty and stifling, and I could not shake off the feeling that we were not alone, as if someone watched from the shadows. "But who did this to you? Who brought you here?" I asked him, trying to reassure him as I cut through the ropes. His eyes flickered with fear. I don't know. I was just walking, and then I was taken." He hesitated, his eyes darting around nervously. "There was a man. I don't know him, but he told me to keep quiet. He told me that if I didn't, I wouldn't live to see the light of day." My blood ran cold. "Was it someone from the estate? Someone who knew you?" He shook his head weakly. "I'm afraid I'm not so sure." His voice cracked, and for a moment I saw the young man get frightened and vulnerable. Suddenly I heard a noise from above. A soft thud, a creaking floorboard. I froze. "John," I hissed before looking back at Anthony. "I need you to help me keep the trapdoor open. I need to get Anthony out of here. But please stay quiet. Someone might appear up there." He nodded frantically, looking as though he could hardly keep his eyes open. I grabbed the lantern and we both crept up the stairs, my pulse quickening. John was standing near the trapdoor, peering through a crack in the door, his face tight with tension. John nodded and kept an eye on the surroundings as I and Anthony went up the staircase. "We've got to get you out before whoever's coming and finds us," I spoke to Anthony. He nodded, his eyes widened, a mixture of fear and confusion. Eventually, I successfully brought him upstairs safely. The small kitchen in the cabin was dimly lit by the flickering flame of the lantern, the scent of stale wood mixed with the faint odor of damp earth. But it felt oddly warm in this little room. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but for now I focused on the task at hand, finding the answers from Anthony Wallace. John sat across from me, his sharp eyes scanning the room, alert as always. From the moment he stepped into this cabin, he had been silent, his gaze constantly sweeping our surroundings. We all knew we could not afford to be reckless now because the kidnapper, or the killer, was still a threat. Anthony looked drained, his face pale, eyes hollow from his days trapped in the dark basement. His hands shook slightly as he grasped the mug of water I'd given him. He wasn't much of a talker, but I knew I needed him to open up if we were to make sense of this tangled web. Anthony, you need to tell me exactly what happened. How did you end up in that basement? I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the mounting questions in my head. He took a long sip from the mug, his hands trembling. He set it down and wiped his lips before meeting my gaze. There was hesitation, but his eyes spoke of fear, of someone who had just barely escaped something terrible. He began, his voice barely above a whisper. It started when I left the estate. Gracie and I. We were going to leave. We were going to run away together. I leaned forward, intrigued. Actually, I wasn't too surprised to hear that Anthony and Gracie were planning to run away from the estate. I had heard rumors of them secretly getting back together after the tragic death of Benjamin Wallace. Run away? I asked, surprised. What makes you think you both should run away together? Anthony nodded, his jaw tightening. After Benjamin died, Gracie's father started pushing her to marry Robert. He said it was for the good of the family, for the better future, as now Robert is the heir to the Wallace. Gracie was done being her father's puppet. She doesn't want to marry Robert, even though she knows Robert is a great guy. We both plan to run away together, far away from the manor. We are in love, Mr. Owen, and we want our freedom together. Anthony began telling us his story, his eyes vacant and distant. And you agreed? You really planned to leave the estate? I asked, my voice softening. Yes. I told her to wait while I found us a place to stay. I had some money saved up. I thought if I could just get us out of Ayrshire. But when I was on my way to get to the train station, someone stopped and kidnapped me. After hearing what he said, I now understand why Gracie seemed to be keeping something from me when I questioned her earlier this morning regarding Anthony's whereabouts. I raised an eyebrow. Someone? Who? Anthony replied, his voice shaky. I don't know. I was just walking toward the station when a man grabbed me from behind, pulled me into an alley and hit me so hard. I don't remember much after that. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was already tied up in the basement. Did you see the man? Did you recognize him? I asked, my curiosity growing. This was the critical point, the connection I needed. Anthony shook his head. No, I couldn't even see his face, because the moment he grabbed me from behind, a black cloth was swiftly thrown over my head. Then I asked him again. So who brought you food and water while you were here? Did you see his face, or even hear his voice when he delivered them to you in the basement? Anthony responded, No, Mr. Owen. He always wore a black mask that completely covered his face. He never spoke to me. He just brought food and water twice a day. He shuddered at the memory. He never said a word. Not a single one. I don't even know what he looked like. His voice faltered. And for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Though there was something odd about his story. Twice a day? You said you didn't even know how long you've been here. How do you know the food and water were brought to you twice a day? I continued with my question. I just felt the need to fill the gap. Anthony answered me nervously. I feel like every time he brings food, it doesn't feel like 24 hours have passed for me. I don't know if I can trust him, especially after what happened earlier this morning. Robert and Alan were just attacked by someone who fled toward the vineyard near this very small cabin. But then I sat back, digesting what he had said about the food delivery chap. A man who wouldn't speak, whose face was hidden. My mind started racing, connecting dots I had never considered before. Could this person be someone from the manor? Someone whom Anthony knew well enough? Perhaps his own friend? A servant? A worker? Or even a relative? Whoever it was, they were careful. Careful enough to leave no trace of who they were. Did he tell you anything? I pressed, hoping to pry out more details. No. I think he was waiting for something. I don't know what it was, but he wasn't going to hurt me. He kept me alive so far. I studied him for a long moment. This man, whoever he was, had kept Anthony alive, fed and watered, like he was a valuable asset. If it was not asking for some ransom money, why not just kill him? Anthony, do you know anything about this cabin? Do you recognize this place? Who owns it? He glanced around the kitchen, his brow furrowed. No, I don't know whose cabin it is. It's so isolated. I've never been here before. I frowned, still trying to piece it together. Whoever took you here, they knew how to keep you from running. They took you here for a reason, or perhaps that reason wasn't just to hold you for ransom. Ransom? Anthony echoed, confused. But I don't have any money or possessions that would make someone think of taking me hostage to demand a ransom. He looked at me, his face a mixture of frustration and helplessness. John, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke. You're still a Wallace, Anthony. You are the next successor after Robert. You're such a valuable asset for the kidnapper. Perhaps the man is expecting some ransom from your uncle, Lord Wallace. I looked over at John. His sharp eyes were fixed on Anthony, and he suddenly cleared his throat. John said carefully, I think someone is trying to manipulate Lord Wallace, to control him by targeting his family, especially the heirs. I need to know more about what's going on at the estate. There's more to this. Someone's playing a much larger game. The full picture was still hidden behind layers of deception. The real question was, who was the shadowed figure that had taken Anthony, and what was he really after? The small kitchen was filled with an oppressive silence after Anthony's revelations. My mind was still racing with the fragments of his story, the masked man, the tension that seemed to thicken the air around us. I knew there was more to this than just a simple kidnapping. There had to be something else. Something tying all the pieces together. As I sat there contemplating, John had been moving around across the room. His eyes were scanning the cabin with the intensity of a hawk. John suddenly called me, his voice low but sharp with urgency. Mate, you need to come see this. I was on my feet before the words had fully registered and quickly made my way to the closet where John was now crouched, peering inside. John, whatever that is, don't touch it with your bare hands, I quickly reminded him. Don't worry, mate, I know that, he replied. Anthony was also curious, and we both approached John, who was standing in front of the closet. What have you found? I asked, a hint of dread creeping into my voice. John gestured to a plastic bag near the back of the closet. Mate, take a look at this. I knelt beside him, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the contents. Inside the bag was a long, thin bladed knife of sorts. It was smeared with dark red stains, fresh blood clinging to the blade, and it was partially covered in dirt, as though someone had tried to hide it hastily. My pulse quickened. That's a weapon. But why is it here? Anthony, are you hurt somewhere in your body? No, the man never hurt me, but he punched me real hard when I was pulled into the alley near the train station. But never once did he use a weapon or sharp object to hurt me, Anthony responded. John's gaze shifted toward the closet's back wall, where something else had caught his attention. Wait, there's more. Using a piece of cloth we found near the closet, I reached in, pulling out a pair of long brown pants, torn from the knee down to the ankle. Some dried blood had stained through the fabric, dark and unmistakable. I stood up, my heart pounding. I said, these torn long pants remind me of something. John stood there looking carefully at those pants, and his voice had an edge of suspicion. But these stains looked like some dried blood. I examined the pants closely. The fabric was worn, clearly not new, and the bloodstains had dried, crusting along the torn edges. So whoever had worn them had been injured. Something clicked in my mind, a memory flashing to the forefront. "Wait a second," I muttered, my fingers tracing the edges of the bloodstains. These pants look familiar." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "Familiar? How?" A sharp realization striking me. The fabric, a piece of ripped fabric. I found a piece of similar cloth, caught on the barbed wire fencing outside Robert's balcony last week, right after Rosy was found dead. John's eyes widened. "Do you think these pants belong to someone in the Wallace family?" I shook my head slowly, hesitantly, my thoughts aligning. "No. I believe these long pants belong to someone who broke into Robert's room on the night Rosy was found dead. I'm certain it's all connected." I stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The discovery in the cabin was more than just a clue. It was the link I needed to tie this all together. I had thought the fabric was insignificant at the time, but now it seemed to point to something much darker, something that had been hidden just under the surface. "I need to keep these," I said firmly, carefully folding the pants and the blooded knife. "We'll take these as evidence. They might be the breakthrough we need." John nodded in agreement without hesitation. "Does that mean the intruder is the same person who kidnapped Anthony and lived in this cabin?" he asked me. I ran a hand over my face, deep in thought. "Most definitely. The man who kidnapped Anthony. He wasn't just a random figure. I think he's someone connected to the Wallace family, someone who's trying to cover up their tracks." I turned to Anthony, who had been listening intently, his eyes wide with a mix of confusion and fear. "Anthony, do you recognize these pants? Have you seen them before? Or perhaps the man who wore them?" Anthony looked at the blood-stained pants, his brow furrowing in thought. "No. I don't think I've ever seen them before. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure." "Do you think you have an enemy? Someone who hates you and has a reason to harm you?" I asked Anthony once again. "Not that I could think of, Mr. Owen," Anthony replied. My mind raced as I pieced together the sequence of events that had brought us to this moment. Whoever had been wearing these pants was connected to the scene outside Robert's balcony. That person had intended to kill Robert Wallace, but their mission had failed. Yet the lingering question remained. Whose blood was it? I reached for a new bag to put the torn pants separated from the blade to get tested later. "We need to get this evidence to the authorities immediately," I said, my voice tight with resolve. "But before we proceed, I have a plan to catch the kidnapper. It's nearly morning, and it's almost time for our fellow to bring food for Anthony. So, John and Anthony, I need you both to play along with my plan." John nodded. "I'll do whatever you ask, mate." "John, I need you to stay upstairs and hide. As soon as the chap comes through the trapdoor into the basement, I need you to shut it behind him. Don't make a sound when he arrives, and don't show yourself until you're sure the man has reached the basement." John met my gaze, his lips curling into a slight grin. "Got it. I'll be out of sight before he knows I'm there. And you, Anthony, I need you to act as though you're still tied up on that bed. You have to look feared and exhausted, like you've been held there for days. But don't move or make a sound until we're sure the man is down in the basement. Once John has shut the trapdoor, I will strike at him from behind." Anthony nodded, taking a deep breath. "I can do that. I won't make a sound until you're ready." I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, but also a glimmer of determination. "We're doing this to put an end to this madness. We need to catch him, Anthony. If we don't, you might still be the next target of his madness." The atmosphere was full of tension as we sat around the small kitchen table. The weight of the plan I had just proposed hung heavily in the air, and I could feel the unease building among us all. It wasn't a foolproof scheme, but it was the best shot we had at catching the person responsible for Anthony's kidnapping. I looked over at Anthony, who had been silent since I'd finished explaining the plan. His face was drawn and pale. Seemed like he had not yet recovered from the fear, exhaustion, and deep psychological toll. "Are you sure you can handle this?" I asked him, my voice soft but firm. "This isn't going to be easy, and it'll require you to play the part of a hostage for just a little longer." Anthony nodded slowly, his eyes unwavering. "I have no choice. I want to see the bastard who did this to me. I want to know why." His hands were clenched tightly on the table, but there was resolve in his voice, despite the underlying fear. I turned to John, who had been unusually quiet. John was never one to back down from danger, and I could see that his mind was already calculating how best to execute the plan. His sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail, making mental notes of where he could position himself and what he could use to ensure we caught the kidnapper off guard. John stood up from the table and stretched, looking around the room. "All right, then, we'll need to make sure everything is exactly how it was before, so the kidnapper doesn't get suspicious." His voice was calm but authoritative, and I could see he was already mentally rearranging things in his head. "Right," I said, standing as well. "Let's get to it. We don't have much time." We spent the next hour carefully going over every detail. The basement trapdoor is indeed heavy, but we made sure it could still be quickly closed from above. We rearranged the furniture and belongings in the cabin to make it look exactly as it had when we first entered. Nothing should be out of place. Last thing we needed was for the kidnapper to suspect anything. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a lion's den. But the thought of Anthony being held in that basement, helpless for who knows how long, spurred me forward. If this man thought he could get away with it, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. When everything was set, we gathered in the small sitting area upstairs. I gave Anthony a final look, checking that he understood the gravity of what we were about to do. "Remember," I said, my voice low, "don't let him see you move. Stay as still as possible. Let him believe you're still trapped." Anthony swallowed hard, nodding. "Understood." "John, are you sure you'll be able to handle the trapdoor?" I asked, double-checking. "Don't worry about me, mate. Just go hide yourself in the basement with Anthony. I'll be ready here," John replied, his voice steady. Anthony suddenly interrupted. "Wait. What if the man isn't heading directly to the basement? What if he's planning to enter the room where John is hiding?" "I have my gun, lad. I'm prepared for that. Please do not worry. I'm aware of that possibility," John answered Anthony confidently. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. This was the most dangerous part of the investigation yet. I wasn't sure how things would play out, but I knew we had no other choice. "All right," I said, clapping my hands together. "Let's get to our position now. We'll soon catch him." The rest of the dawn passed in uneasy silence. I hardly kept my eyes open, my thoughts spinning with what could go wrong. Every noise from the cabin sent my pulse spiking, but nothing disturbed us. John stayed alert upstairs, his eyes never straying from the shadows, while Anthony lay in the corner, pretending to be asleep, though I knew he was just as restless as I was. When the morning sun began to rise, the first light of the morning creeping through the cracks in the wooden cabin walls, I felt the tension in my chest tighten once again. That was it. The trap was set. We waited for the man for a few moments, which felt like an eternity. The trap door remained silent, and the basement was perfectly still. I took a final look at Anthony, who was lying weak and motionless, with his hand as if still tied to the iron bed frame. Meanwhile, John was upstairs, his eyes fixed on the trapdoor, waiting for the moment when the kidnapper would descend into the basement. I hid behind the basement clutter near the far corner, out of sight, yet close enough to act when the moment arrived. We waited. Minutes felt like hours, but finally I heard the faint creak of the trapdoor opening. My heart skipped a beat. I held my breath, still as a statue. The basement was dark, but the faint light from the trapdoor illuminated the figure descending the stairs, moving cautiously. The man was wearing a dark coat, his face still hidden by a black mask, just as Anthony had described. He was holding a tray with what looked like food and a cup of water, probably to continue his twisted ritual of feeding Anthony to keep him alive. I held my breath as the kidnapper stepped into the basement, unaware that he was about to walk straight into our trap. Now was the time. It was very dark in the basement. And in an instant, I heard the trapdoor creak shut above us. That man froze, and I could feel his suspicion rising in the air, but it was too late. I emerged from my hiding place, stood behind the man who brought Anthony's food, pointed my gun at the back of his head, and signaled for Anthony to assist me in tying him up. Drop the food. Put your hands up and don't move, or I'll blow up your head. I whispered close to the man's ear, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. The man froze, his entire body tensing. He hadn't expected this. His breath hitched as I stepped closer, keeping the gun on the back of his head. Anthony, help me tie him up. I muttered to Anthony, keeping my eyes on the man's every movement. With surprising quickness, Anthony grabbed the rope that had bound him earlier and tied the man's hands behind his back. He didn't make a sound, his face pale but resolute. Once the man was secured, I gestured for Anthony to pull the mask off. As he pulled off the black mask that was covering his face, as we all expected, Anthony was surprised to see who the person behind the black mask was.